Welcome back to Pod of the Century. Galen Clavio, Daniel Eves, back again. Good to see you again. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. It's great to see the World Cup now in full flow. We're in full flow in the knockout stages, and we have a very tasty quarterfinal slate ahead of us now. So yeah, very excited.
It is. This is when I love the group stage. The group stage always has some fun matchups, some unexpected things. But this is really where the rubber hits the road. The quarterfinals, it's like the one stage of the World Cup that's happened essentially through its entire history, except for that weird flirtation with the second group stage, which I still don't totally understand. But yeah, when we looked at these potential quarterfinal matchups before the knockouts got started, Daniel, we thought to ourselves, well, we might get a couple of really awesome matchups. It's unlikely we'll get, the all-timer matchups from a brand name perspective that it looks like we might get, and yet we almost got them. I would say 7 out of the 8 slots ended up getting filled the way that you would have, I guess, quote-unquote, wanted if you wanted the best possible quarterfinal matchups. And actually the one that didn't, which we'll talk about, that happened today, I think will actually end up giving us a better game than what would have happened if the favorite had won. This is a really fascinating tournament so far. The last couple of days have been really fascinating. Let's go ahead and dive right into it. Let's start with today's games. And the big upset, the one that I was just referring to, Morocco advances 0-0 over Spain, 3-0 in the penalty shootout. We don't see that very often in World Cup play. This was one of those games where it wasn't a classic bunkering. It wasn't like Morocco just sat back the entire time and let Spain dominate them. Certainly the Spanish dominated possession. I mean, I don't know what it ended up at, but at one point it was almost 80-20 in possession and was about a 4-1 ratio on passes completed. But Morocco took some chances. They had to overcome some injury issues and then threw up one of the best penalty shootout performances I think I've ever seen, particularly out of a team that you might, not classify certainly in the top rung of international soccer. What was your overall takeaway from watching that game and what happened to Spain, I guess?
I thought it was a fascinating game, honestly. One of those 0-0s, which was very enjoyable. I thought it was interesting. Spain just looked very content with just keeping the ball and not really being very aggressive against a team which is clearly weaker than them, which I thought was an interesting tactic to go with. Obviously, we've seen Spain do amazing things with the possession game. But yeah, you were right. The game ended nearly 80% possession to Spain. And they had more shots than Morocco, but they had 13 shots and only 1 on target.
Yeah.
1 shot on target against Morocco is not impressive. And I think it goes to show that their defense is very solid. Their midfield is very solid. They got Sergio Busquets, kind of the veteran figure holding it, but then they've got the youth coming through, the Xavi and Iniesta regens in Gavi and Pedri, who both played well in their own right. But that front line is not a World Cup winning team, and I think we saw that today. The fact that Roman Saiz of, I believe, still Wolves, or no, he's not even at Wolves anymore. He's playing in Turkey, Besiktas. He kind of locked that front three down. Is kind of goes to show that they weren't going to go on and beat a Portugal, as we'll get onto in a second, who looked very, very impressive, and they certainly weren't going to beat a France or an England after that game.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely brand of Spain, but not the Spain that we've come to know. Very, very heavy on possession without a whole lot else to show for it. We talked about that in the group stage with the Spanish team. They scored goals, but most of the goals came against one team. And that was that Costa Rica game where Costa Rica looked completely incapable of handling possession. And, I'm sure that that's to some degree what the Spanish thought they would eventually do against Morocco, that they would just wear them out. They wouldn't be able to keep track of things. And yet, people forget this Morocco team has a lot of players at really top clubs. And, these are not guys who are going to be afraid of the Spanish or what they bring to the table. It is interesting, though, because, Morocco was one of the few group winners in the group stage that had a negative goal differential in terms of expected goals. They actually finished the goal differential there minus 0.5. Which was worse, I think, than every other winner that went through. Like Japan also had a negative one, but it was only 0.4. Netherlands was 0.3. All three of those teams we had some questions about. But Morocco was the big question mark because even though they won 2 games in the group stage, one of those was against Canada, who was like terminally incapable of defending anybody, and one of them was against Belgium, who I'm still not entirely sure Belgium's aware that the World Cup took place this month, the way that they played in that game. So, to watch them come out and put that performance together and frankly, to watch Spain not adapt to the situation, it revealed, I think, what you just pointed out, which is I don't think the Spain team had another gear. And to some degree, got really lucky that Germany was as inept as they were in front of goal, or just unlucky, maybe not inept. Otherwise, I don't think Spain would have necessarily even made it through to this stage.
Yeah, 100%. I was very surprised that Luis Enrique didn't make a change. They just didn't have any threat going forward. Marco Asensio is not a striker, and he's not physical enough. He's not technically adept enough to really play that position. Alvaro Morata, we've seen him fail on multiple different stages and proved that today. He only had a 30-minute plus extra time showing. But Spain are in a little bit of a similar situation to the US, where they need to find a striker pretty soon if they want to excel in the coming tournaments, because around them they have a very solid team.
Yeah.
I mean, you see 80% possession in a World Cup game. In 9 times out of 10, you win that game because the other team's simply not going to get the ball in the box. But Spain's not getting it in the box either. So
right, that's the problem. And this seems like the World Cup again, where you have to be able to score, or you have to be able to go to a penalty shootout and make it up there. There was talk on the broadcast about how Spain had taken like 1,000 penalties in training. They might need to take maybe another 1,000 after that performance, maybe from a major side. I mean, Japan's penalty shootout was not very good a couple of days ago, but this from Spain was shocking, like how bad they were, how much they were telegraphing what they were doing. And, to not get one past the keeper and into the goal is really hard to get your head wrapped around.
Yeah. 100%. I think we saw something similar. The way the Spanish players took the penalties was similar to some of the Japanese players in the slow, stuttered walk to the ball, letting the keeper kind of get his eye where you're going. Whereas Croatia and Morocco, 2-3 steps, run up to the ball, pick your spot and hit it. It's more old school, but it's clearly the way which is working long term.
Yeah.
And the slow step. I was surprised with Sergio Busquets that he was doing that. I feel like he is a more traditional player who would take a couple steps and hit that into the corner. And we've said it time and time again, and I've heard you say it time and time again, elevate your penalties. These low penalties, a couple yards to the keeper's left or right, are going to be saved by any top-level keeper.
Yeah. And
Yassine Bounou proved that today. And he plays in Sevilla. He plays for Sevilla in La Liga. So he's played against a lot of these players. He's potentially saved penalties against some of these players. I don't know the stats on that, but he has played these players many times. And I think that will have helped him today. And the commentators on the broadcast mentioned it. He does speak Spanish as well. So that will have certainly been a help for him.
Absolutely. And all credit to Morocco hitting 3 out of 4. The Panenka at the end there by Hakimi. I mean, just style. Love it in that. Then that's going to, I think, be really helpful for this Morocco team. They're going to be the underdog in the next game. But they've got this win under their belt, and they've hit the toughest pressure situation you're going to hit in the World Cup, at least at this stage, and they've managed to pass with flying colors. They will be taking on Portugal. I guess we're keeping it, kind of at the edge of the Mediterranean and slightly beyond here, as they just absolutely annihilate Switzerland today, 6-1. This one was probably the biggest shock to me of the knockout stage. Not that I didn't think Portugal would eventually win. I didn't think they were going to win 6-1 against a Swiss side that isn't that bad. I mean, this is a decent Swiss side. They're a I don't want to get too much into stereotypes and cliches, but they're very organized. They're physically imposing, especially against the Portuguese side, which tends to be a little more diminutive in size. And they didn't look like they belonged on the same field. A hat trick from Ramos, the first of the whole tournament. You get Pepe scoring a goal at age 39. He becomes the oldest goal scorer in, I think, 2 World Cups. It was just a comprehensive performance by Portugal, and obviously the overshadow here was Ronaldo being relegated to the bench. And a lot of my concerns about Portugal were based upon the idea that Ronaldo was going to insist on being in the center of the action. This Ronaldo light Portugal side suddenly looks a lot more dangerous.
100%. And all credit to Fernando Santos for making that decision. That's not an easy decision. He knew he would get butchered by the media if he dropped Ronaldo and they lost that game. But he had the guts to do it, and fair play, it's clearly worked. I mean, the rest of the team, it just looked a whole lot more fluid. Bruno Fernandes, João Felix, and see the kind of fresh Gonzalo Ramos, which not many people knew about. 21 years old, that's pretty impressive. A hat trick at the World Cup. I don't think anyone had that predicted. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if Ronaldo now does play a role in the next game. I certainly don't think he starts, but it'll be interesting to see if the game is tight, if he comes on at halftime, if he comes on in the 60th minute, or if he comes on in the 85th minute for his little cameo. Yeah, that's a really tricky decision for Fernando Santos, but he's got it right today.
Yeah, and it's one of those where a lot of it's going to depend on how incisive can Portugal be offensively against Morocco. The chances, there's a very good chance that they could do the same thing to Morocco that they did to Switzerland, in that they're not going to be satisfied with sitting on the ball. They actually had less possession today than the Swiss did. But the movement, the playmaking ability, and the finishing ability, that first goal by Ramos is probably the goal of the tournament at this point. To wedge it in to that tight of an angle, it's certainly the most shocking goal of the tournament, I think, in terms of just like how on earth did you get that past the keeper into that corner at the angle that you did? It almost didn't look possible. But as you mentioned, several other players in this attack for Portugal just really seem like they're on the top of their game. And as much as their defense was leaky in the group stage, Switzerland certainly didn't challenge that very much. And I look at this Morocco side, and it's like it's hard to envision them, being able to ship more than one goal, maybe 2 max past Portugal. And Portugal looks equal to that task pretty much comprehensively at this point.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously everyone wrote Morocco off of this game, so I certainly don't think they should be written off against Portugal. But obviously Portugal are going to be the considerable favorites going into that game. The way they looked today was very impressive, almost I think arguably as impressive as Brazil looked in their round of 16 match. I think certain teams, there's probably a handful of teams who have very much exceeded the expectations, which were already pretty high. And I think that's sometimes a rarity coming into a World Cup, when a lot of the top teams certainly don't perform considerably above the expectations. But I think Portugal today certainly did that. And without Ronaldo, that's very impressive. So it's a steep task for Morocco, but they're going to be on a high, of course. The whole country's going to be behind them. There was videos on social media of crowds in Paris and Madrid of Moroccan expats going crazy in the streets. And I'm sure the players will feel that nationalism behind them, and they'll take that pride with them into the game in another slightly geopolitical matchup.
Yeah, slightly. Yes, right. Let's talk about the games from yesterday too. You just mentioned one of them, Brazil 4, South Korea 1. I'm sure most people thought that was going to be the largest goal scoring margin of the group stage or the knockout stage, and it looked like it was a shoe-in. A dominant performance by Brazil in this one, and when I picked Brazil to win the World Cup before it started, this was the Brazil that I was picking based upon this multifaceted team that just is so skilled and also can finish and also can shut you down defensively. They just look so fluid in this game. They look like they can do essentially whatever they wanted. And again, it's one of those where I look at South Korea. I'm like, that team's not that bad. That team is known for being very organized defensively, and they were completely undone within the first 15 minutes of this game, and Brazil never really looked back. You mentioned in an email, like, how good Brazil looked yesterday. What was most impressive to you about the way that this team played?
I think everyone was looking at their attacking prowess, and clearly they looked incredibly fluid. And there was questions coming into the tournament whether the likes of Neymar, Vinicius, Rafinha, Anthony, Richarlison could all link, because there's so much talent there. But it was going to be if one person's going to take the limelight or if they could gel. And they clearly have gel, but I thought their defensive performance was very impressive. Yeah. Limiting Heung-min Son to one shot the whole game, when clearly he's the talisman for the South Korean team. They run through him. They try to find him on the edge of the box constantly. But Casemiro was there to suppress that literally every time Son took a touch. He couldn't get anything. He didn't get a single yard of space. Cho up top for South Korea, 0 shots the whole game. Limiting the striker and the number 10 in Heung-min Son to 1 shot is incredibly impressive. And if they can keep that defensive performance up with their obviously insane prowess up top, then they're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, it feels like the only way that you really make headway against Brazil is if your attack is dangerous enough and contains enough of its own facets that Brazil has to do something to counter. But the problem there is, as you just mentioned, that entire list of attacking players that Brazil rolls out there. Normally, to be that proficient offensively, you're going to have to give something up in defense, and you're dealing with Richarlison, Neymar, Rafinha, Vinicius Jr. Like that 4 right there is able to carry out pretty much anything that they want to at this stage. Now, it'll certainly get a little bit harder as you get further in to the tournament, but they look like real good value at this point. And I think what's been most fascinating, as much as Neymar has taken justifiable criticism over the course of his career of being a diva, of being so singularly focused on himself, he has essentially let Richarlison kind of co-star in this. He's passing the ball very effectively. He's seeing the field incredible. He's creating not just opportunities for himself but for others. And coming off of an injury that he suffered in the group stage where his ankle looked like a grapefruit, to see him slide right back into the role that he had before and look joyful doing it, as opposed to, say, Cristiano Ronaldo, who certainly did not look joyful today, that's a really hard combination for any team to break.
100%. And I think another worrying sign for other teams is how happy the team looks together. I mean, after every goal, they have a coordinated dance celebration, which has been criticized by some, but I think it's brilliant. It's
great.
It's great to see young players enjoying their moment on the big stage. And that should be worrying for other teams. I know it seems silly, but the fact that all the other attacking players are so happy to see their teammates scoring is a threat to other teams, because often in teams like that, the players just want to score for themselves. We saw it today. Ronaldo walked off the pitch at the end of the game when the rest of the Portugal team went to applaud their fans. He's clearly not that happy that he's not the guy scoring for them. But it's the opposite for Brazil. They're very happy to be there. They know they're probably the favorites, and they want to win it all, and they know they'll have to be a team to do that.
Yeah, we've seen dire Brazil in the past. 2014, that team, the weight of expectations of hosting and everything else, you could tell was very heavy on them. 2006, 2010, 2018. I mean, these were all years where their group stage performances belied a mismatch of talent and tactics, or just an unhappiness at the core. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, the way that they look right now, this is the stereotype of Brazil that often gets misapplied to Brazil in every World Cup. It's like, oh, they're joyous and samba and all of that. It's like, it's generally not true, but it does look like it is right now. And we'll see if they're able to continue that on. But you got to like their chances at this point.
Yeah. I will say there's one visible weak spot, and that is their fullbacks. They are playing Danilo at left back, who is an aging left back who couldn't cut it in the Premier League. Obviously, he's playing for Juventus, but that's he's clearly not a world-beating left back. And they're playing Eder Militao, who is an out-and-out centre back at right back.
Yeah.
Now, when they play against the likes of Argentina or Netherlands, as we will figure out soon, they will exploit that. And we saw the Netherlands exploit the flanks tremendously against the US. Dumfries, 2 crosses, 2 goals. They will use that as their main form of attack. And Argentina obviously clearly has very, very impressive wingers. So that'll be something that Brazil will have to work to potentially cover for, but I'm sure the likes of Casemiro will help and come in. They've got Thiago Silva and Marquinhos as their 2 centre backs. So they should have enough talent to cover for them, but that will definitely be the area that offenses will target.
Yeah. The other game from yesterday, Croatia advances 1-1. They win the penalty shootout 3-1. This was an odd game in a lot of ways. We ended up watching the second half together. It was a game where Japan was on the front foot. They score before half, and it looks like things are really going their way. And you thought, well, gosh, this Japanese team is so energetic that they're going to be able to carry that through, and Croatia is going to run out of gas. Now, Croatia did run out of gas, but not before Ivan Perisic tied it up in the 55th minute. And Japan never could break through in terms of finding that final goal, and then fell apart completely in the penalty shootout. A big accomplishment for Croatia, really, I think, because it looked they were ripe for the picking in this one, and they figured out a way to kind of nurse their way to victory. And I think the Japanese probably have to reflect back on this and feel like this was an opportunity lost.
Yeah. We did watch it together, and we both mentioned how Japan was switching their formations throughout the game a lot, which it happens. Many teams do it, but not as much as this Japan side. They switch from a 4 at the back to a 5 at the back very frequently. The 4 at the back provides more attacking threat going forward, but they realized when they were playing the 4 at the back, they were getting exposed defensively. So they were switching back, but they just couldn't find that middle ground to get the win. They would score when they had that 4 at the back, but they'd also concede. And they just didn't have the threat going forward when they were in that defensive formation. And you got to give credit to Croatia. They were written off by many, many people as they were too old to compete on this stage. But they lost at 120 minutes against a very fit team. And they took it to penalties, and their experience showed. They stepped up, they hit the corners, they elevated their penalties, as we say, and
they did that with no Luka Modric, who'd been subbed off, with no Ivan Perisic, who had been subbed off, with no Mateo Kovacic, who also got subbed off. I mean, it was like this was not the lineup you would have selected to go take penalties against anybody, and yet they figured out a way to get it done. Now, some of that was Japan really looked overwhelmed by the moment. It wasn't just the lack of elevation. Like they really were struggling with the pressure, and I think that shone through on both of the first 2 kicks, and then the one that they missed in the 4th round. So disappointing for Japan. I mean, they had an opportunity to make it to the quarters for the first time in their history, but they don't. Morocco does make it to the quarters for the first time in their history. They end up being the first CAF team to make it to the quarterfinals since Ghana did it 12 years ago, back in 2010. And a rarity, like you just don't see a whole lot of non-UEFA, non-CONMEBOL teams in the quarterfinals. We saw Costa Rica do it in 2014. We get one of those representatives here in 2022, and it ends up being Morocco. So congratulations to them. It ends up setting up a pretty fascinating set of quarterfinals, and we'll quickly go through those and kind of give an analysis. Let's start with the pair. Hey, sorry about that.
I couldn't tell if that was on my end. Sorry about that.
It's on mine. I'm having some internet issues over here for some reason, but anyway, we'll just dive right back into it. It's fine. I'll on the recording. The folks watching this live, hi. But anyway, okay. We'll dive back in and look at the quarterfinal matchups now. Let's go to the one that we just left, which is Brazil versus Croatia. For an aging Croatia squad that has to barely nurse it over the line against Japan, this is not an ideal opponent to be facing in the quarterfinals. Brazil going to be a heavy favorite in this one. I mean, what's the route if you're Croatia? Is there a route to victory here other than trying to just survive and take it to penalties?
I want to say there is, but I don't think there is. I think Brazil are just, other than the fact that they have far more talent than the Croatian team, I think they are just younger and more energetic than this aging Croatian team. Although we've seen that the aging statements may not actually affect Croatia as much as we think they do. But I think that their tactic has to be to keep the game tight, sit in. They can be structured. They have a very solid back line. Vardiol is a young up and coming player. Dejan Lovren's been there before. They've got Modric and Kovacic. They need to sit in for 70, 80 minutes, keep it at 0-0. If they're one down, give it a go for 20 minutes. If it's still 0-0, take it to extra time, and they'll fancy themselves on penalties if they can take it there. But Brazil is going to look to come out right from kickoff and just take it to them. And if Brazil get an early goal, I think it could be floodgates opened, and we could see another high-scoring affair.
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time picking against Brazil in this one by probably a couple goal margin. I will say, obviously, Croatia is pretty crafty. I don't think they're going to get unlocked with the same level of ease that Korea or some of Brazil's opponents in the group stage did. But yeah, this one seems like a fairly easy pick. We'll see what happens, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. The other one taking place on Friday of this week, a very intriguing matchup, Netherlands versus Argentina. This one I keep going back and forth on because the Netherlands was underwhelming a bit in the group stage, largely because their opponents were underwhelming. It almost felt like they got dragged down a bit by them. They were very impressive against a relatively naive U.S. squad in the first knockout game. Now they take on Argentina, who of the big brand name teams is probably the one that's got the most vulnerabilities, but also has some of the best individual players. I would lean Argentina in this one, I think, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Netherlands walked out of here with a result.
Yeah, I would say the Netherlands certainly didn't look outstanding against the United States. They scored a couple goals off of just absolutely shocking defensive displays from the US. And against Argentina, you would expect them to mark their men in the box and not give players 5 yards in the middle of the box. That doesn't happen at this level, or certainly shouldn't happen at this level. And I think Netherlands have actually been getting relatively overrun in the midfield in their games. So it'll be interesting if Argentina can control the midfield and get the ball up to the likes of Messi, who can then spread the ball or just work some of his own magic. Then I think Argentina will be too much for the Netherlands. But if the Netherlands can expose the flanks and get the ball to Cody Gakpo and Memphis Depay again, they could certainly get a result. I don't think the game is leaning one way heavy either way. I wouldn't be surprised if it does go to extra time.
Yeah, this one feels like extra time to me. I mean, I think Argentina is going to win. I think their quality will eventually win out in this one. But Netherlands, I mean, I think this is kind of Louis van Gaal's last ride. And this is a guy who, despite not succeeding at United, is, certainly a great tactical mind and has a huge string of successes in football. So we'll see what he's able to concoct here, and we'll see what Argentina is able to do. I will say, you mentioned a lack of pressure and being at ease. Messi himself kind of reminds me of what you were talking about with Brazil. The fact that he's scored now multiple times, he has an aura about him that he feels like he can do whatever. He might need to in this game because Argentina is going to need some individual moments of brilliance, I think, in this one just to carry them, since they're not getting a huge amount consistently from the folks that are in front of him. So we'll see what happens. We go to Saturday, Morocco, Portugal. We talked about this one a little bit. The way that Portugal's playing now, you'd have to tab them as the favorite in this one, but I don't think Morocco is entirely out of it if they can maintain a good defensive shape throughout and just kind of frustrate Portugal in terms of the creative moves that they're trying to make.
Yeah, I think Morocco needs to take the pride that they got from that win against a semi-rival and then stay within their tactical shape, not lose their heads too much. And if they can do that, then they'll test Portugal. They will be able to hold them. We've shown that they're tactically adept enough to do that. So it's gonna be an interesting one, although I think we saw today Portugal looked very dangerous up top. And I imagine Ronaldo will be sat on the bench, but he is a very good super sub to bring on, as we know, even though he's not in his prime per se right now. If the game is tight and you bring on Ronaldo, it will kind of be the perfect moment for him to put his stamp on the tournament.
Yeah, I mean that is always looming. It's hard to envision it given how kind of in his own head he seems to be right now. But if it's going to pop up, it's probably going to pop up somewhere like this. All right, that leaves us the last one, which I know has probably been on your mind since it became clear that it was going to happen. France, England, the last quarterfinal. I'm just going to let you kind of take this one away. I want your unvarnished feelings on where you think this one's headed.
Well, I know I'm certainly way too optimistic, and that will be the state of the whole of England, as is ever the way. I think we look good right now, which is worrying. I think honestly, it's tragic that Sterling had to go home due to personal matters, but that's taken a question off of Southgate's mind and makes his decision easier. I think he has to start Foden and Saka again up top. Foden looked brilliant, 2 assists against Senegal. Saka's looked excellent all tournament. Kane he's locked in his spot. He'll play 90 minutes. And Henderson probably deserves that spot. He's proving to be a bit of glue between our midfield and defense. As much as I was a bit of a Henderson hater, to be fair, he's proven me wrong in that aspect. I think he adds some stability to the team. But at the end of the day, France have by far the best player in the tournament right now in Mbappe, and he could very well score 2 or 3 goals against us. He's going up against Harry Maguire and John Stones if he cuts in the field a little bit, and that, as an England fan, scares me quite a lot. I've seen Kyle Walker defend very well against Mbappe in Champions League matches before, so I hope he can do a job. But I think it'll be a cagey affair. I think there will be goals naturally in the game. I think we could see certainly above 2 goals, and I feel like it won't go to extra time, but I'm quietly optimistic that we're going to get a result.
Is that just largely because you don't know if you can take extra time?
Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't make it through extra time. I know that's fact. I will be. My heart rate will be unhealthy, to say the least.
I will say, I mean, I agree with everything you said, and I guess as a neutral here, I guess my feeling is that England, I think, is being undervalued going into this game, because even though Mbappe has certainly been the best player in the tournament, I think you could make an argument that England's had among the best looking offenses so far in the tournament. And there's certainly concerns for both sides. I think you could, certainly, and I talked about this a couple of days ago on the podcast, the center back pairing for England is one that I would be a little nervous about, or at least one part of the center back pairing. But I would also be concerned if I was, looking at France about the goalkeeping situation, as I just don't think Lloris has been at the top of his game either for club or for country. And, all it takes is one bad game. And so this is going to be a fascinating battle. I'm really curious to see who decides that they want the ball in this game, because I think both of these teams are going to be a bit concerned about being on the front foot, and that it's interesting because I think back to when England played in Italy in the Euro final. It looked like they were just going to race out and do what they needed to do, and then they scored that first goal and stepped back, and that ended up being their undoing. I don't need to remind you of that. Now I don't know that you can necessarily take that approach against France because you're going to want to be a little more cagey. I think there's probably a little more respect for the French in this game. But by the same token, I think the French defense is perhaps there to be had given the offensive and attacking quality that the English have. So it's some really decisive and interesting decisions by Southgate to be made here about exactly what game he wants his team to play. And I have no clue what direction he's going to go with it. It's really an interesting thing.
Yeah, I think we will play on the front foot. That leaves us tremendously open for Mbappe to get 5 yards of space. Once he gets 5 yards of space, he makes that 10 yards of space. And then all of a sudden he's got a one-on-one with Jordan Pickford. So that's scary. I think if we sit in, though, that he will also pick us off that way and we won't score. So I think we have to play the game we played against Senegal. We have Bellingham bringing the ball up, breaking tackles, and then feeding that front three, which has looked very dangerous. And I think if we play on the front foot and then don't immediately park the bus as we did against Italy, then we could get a result. But I think, as you mentioned, I would hate to see another Euro final situation because that was very disappointing to watch and a big mistake from Southgate.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if the lessons were learned, and we'll see how solid this French team actually is. It is a shame that one of these teams isn't going to be surviving past this point, but that's the way the draw works, and it was always somewhat on the cards given the way that things came out when the draw was first announced. So anyway, that'll wrap it up for us. Any final thoughts from you before we finish things off here?
No, I hope everyone keeps engaging in the tournament. I know the United States is now out of it, but there's still some fantastic football to watch. These games are all going to be excellent games. Stay involved, keep watching, and fingers crossed that the US will be in this situation in 4 years' time.
One can only hope. It's going to be pretty fascinating to see what happens in these next 4 games. This is always, like I said, this is where the fun really kicks in. Some really compelling matchups between these teams, and maybe even more compelling matchups once we get to the semifinals. So all of that coming up here. Daniel, my thanks always to you for joining us here on the show. My thanks to all you folks for listening in. We'll be back probably early next week after the quarters have been played. We'll reset. We'll talk about what we're looking at for the semis, which will be kind of in the middle of next week as the World Cup continues on. You're listening to Pod of the Century. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.